Dwayne "Dog" Chapman, Dog the Bounty Hunter, and his team of professionals are pursuing the country's most wanted fugitives in a new series called Dogs Most Wanted.
One shocking investigation was all it took to bring Dog's long-awaited comeback to a screeching halt. Millions saw him as fearless and impossible to intimidate. But just when it looked like he was preparing for one of the biggest comebacks of his career, everything came crashing down all at once. Just as he prepared to return to television, an internal investigation uncovered something so serious that an entire network walked away before a single episode could air. What exactly was discovered? And did it destroy his reputation for good? Join us as we uncover the terrifying discovery that caused Dog the Bounty Hunter to be shut down.
Chapman's been in Oklahoma prison for 10 years, so he's a seasoned criminal.
Escape charges, gun charges. You know, it sounds like the guy's been running the wrong kind of life.
We don't want the Chapman name going like that, so we got to get rid of this guy quick.
The life he tried to leave behind. To millions, Dog Chapman was a big personality. With his signature blonde hair and leather vest, he earned people's admiration by tracking down long-lost fugitives. He was blunt, confrontational, and was always willing to offer second chances, which made him one of the most recognizable personalities on reality television. What many viewers didn't realize, however, was that his own life had once looked nothing like the image they saw on television. Born Dwayne Chapman, Dog's childhood was rough. He was a school dropout by 13 years old and eventually became involved with a biker gang while still a teenager. Instead of preparing for adulthood like most young people his age, he was already drifting toward a dangerous lifestyle that would ultimately change the course of his future. Those early choices would haunt him for the rest of his days. Everything came crashing down during the 1970s. Dog became caught up in a drug deal that ended in tragedy when two people lost their lives. Although he wasn't the person who pulled the trigger, Texas law at the time allowed prosecutors to charge everyone involved in certain crimes with first-degree murder. He was convicted and sentenced to prison, serving 18 months before eventually being released. For many people, prison would have severely dented their story. But for Dog, it became the beginning of an interesting life. After leaving prison, he claimed his father rejected him completely, telling him to burn his birth certificate because he wished he had never been born. Whether those words were meant to motivate him or simply reflected years of disappointment, they left a lasting impact. Instead of returning to the life he had known before prison, Dog made a decision that would define everything that followed. He turned to bounty hunting, eager to outgrow his old criminal reputation. Over time, that decision transformed him into one of the most successful bounty hunters in America. His television career only amplified that reputation, turning a former inmate into an unlikely national celebrity whose story inspired countless people struggling to rebuild their own lives. Escaping his past was only his first fight. What happened next would prove far more devastating than anything he had survived behind bars. The tragedies that changed everything. By the time Dog the Bounty Hunter became a television phenomenon, millions of viewers believed they knew exactly who Dwayne Chapman was. Every week, they watched him chase dangerous fugitives, comfort frightened families, and deliver emotional speeches about second chances. On camera, he seemed completely in control, but his personal life was becoming increasingly complicated, and some of the most painful chapters of his life were unfolding far from public view. One of the biggest shocks came more than 2 decades after his release from prison. Before his detention, Dog had been in a relationship with a woman named Debbie White. When he went to prison, they lost contact, and he later learned that Debbie had passed away while he was still behind bars after struggling with her own personal battles. What he didn't know was that she had been pregnant when they last saw each other. More than 20 years later, Dog discovered he had a son he never knew existed, Christopher Michael Hecht. It should have been the kind of reunion most parents dream about. Instead, history repeated itself in the most heartbreaking way imaginable. Christopher was already serving time in prison after being convicted of a hate crime. Rather than meeting his son across a dinner table or at a family gathering, Dog met him behind prison walls. Having once experienced prison himself, he later admitted that seeing his own child in the same environment was almost unbearable. Sadly, that wasn't the only family tragedy he would face. In 2006, Dog married Beth Chapman, the woman who had become not only his wife, but also his closest friend and business partner. It should have been one of the happiest days of their lives. Instead, just hours before the ceremony, they received devastating news. His 23-year-old daughter, Barbara Chapman, had lost her life in a car accident in Alaska. Faced with this difficulty, the family chose to continue with the wedding before sharing the heartbreaking news with their guests during the reception. The years that followed brought even more emotional strain. Dog became involved in a painful custody battle over one of his grandsons after allegations of abusive discipline surfaced against the child's father. Court proceedings followed, and Dog openly admitted that listening to recordings connected to the case was one of the most distressing experiences of his life. Around the same time, his relationship with his daughter Lisa also faced enormous challenges. She later spoke publicly about growing up during the height of her father's fame, describing a difficult childhood shaped by addiction, instability, and painful misunderstandings before the two eventually reconciled years later. Then came the loss that changed everything. In 2017, Beth Chapman was diagnosed with throat cancer. At first, the family remained hopeful. She underwent treatment and continued filming alongside Dog, refusing to let the illness define her. But as time passed, her condition worsened. Cameras that were originally meant to document another exciting chapter of their careers instead captured one family's heartbreaking fight against a disease they could not stop. Beth insisted on sharing her journey publicly because she hoped her experience might encourage others facing similar battles. Viewers watched as treatments became more difficult, her health declined, and the optimism that had once surrounded the family slowly gave way to uncertainty. In June 2019, Beth passed away at the age of 51. Her death shattered completely him. Only a few months later, Dog was rushed to the hospital after experiencing severe chest pain and difficulty breathing. Doctors later diagnosed him with a pulmonary embolism, a potentially life-threatening condition caused by blood clots in the lungs. He would later admit that, in the darkest moments of his grief, he questioned what he was still living for without Beth by his side. It was one of the rawest and most emotional admissions he had ever made publicly. After enduring unimaginable personal loss, fans hoped he would eventually find a way to rebuild. And for a while, it looked like he finally had. A brand new television series promised a fresh start, but before the first episode could even air, something happened behind the scenes that brought everything to a sudden halt. The comeback that ended before it began. After losing Beth Chapman, many people wondered whether Dog would ever return to television. For years, the couple had been inseparable both on and off the screen. Without Beth, many fans assumed that chapter of his career had come to an end. Dog wasn't ready to walk away just yet. Grief had changed him, but it hadn't taken away his determination to keep working. In interviews following Beth's passing, he spoke openly about how difficult it had been to adjust to life without her. He admitted there were days when simply getting out of bed felt like a challenge. Yet he also believed Beth would have wanted him to keep moving forward rather than allow grief to consume him. Slowly, he began focusing on what came next. That next chapter was supposed to be Dog Unleashed. Unlike some of his earlier television projects, this wasn't just another bounty hunting series. It was intended to introduce viewers to a new phase of his career, while proving that he could still command an audience without Beth beside him. Production moved forward, promotional material was created, and excitement began building among longtime fans who were eager to see him back on screen. Everything appeared to be falling into place. However, problems were beginning to emerge. According to later statements from the production company, concerns arose during filming that prompted an internal investigation. At the time, almost nobody outside the production knew anything was wrong. There were no public announcements and no indication that the project was in danger. Fans continued expecting a premiere date, believing the series was simply moving through the normal stages of production. Then everything changed. Instead of announcing a release schedule, the company released a brief statement revealing that Dog Unleashed had been canceled before it ever aired. They explained that they had made the decision after completing an internal investigation into actions allegedly taken during production. While the statement praised Dog's long career and acknowledged his contributions to television, it made one thing unmistakably clear: the show would not be moving forward. For the fans who had waited years to see Dog return, the statement landed like a bombshell. Naturally, people began asking the same question: what could possibly have happened behind the scenes that was serious enough to stop an entire production? Speculation spread quickly across social media. Without many details available, rumors filled the silence, and curiosity only continued to grow. For Dog, the timing couldn't have been any worse. This wasn't just another television contract. It represented a chance to rebuild his career after one of the most devastating periods of his life. Losing Beth had already forced him to imagine a future he never wanted. Now, the comeback he had been working toward suddenly seemed to be slipping away before anyone had the opportunity to see it. Whatever the production team discovered, they believed it was serious enough to walk away from the project entirely. But what could possibly have happened behind the scenes to make that decision inevitable? What really happened behind the scenes? For days, fans were left with more questions than answers. Was this simply a contract dispute behind closed doors? Or had something happened during filming that made continuing the show impossible? The production company eventually broke its silence. In a much stronger public statement, Unleashed Entertainment explained that its internal investigation had allegedly uncovered conduct it believed could not be ignored. According to the company's president and CEO, Mike Donovan, the investigation found that Dog had allegedly made racist and homophobic comments during production. The statement also alleged that illegal activity had taken place while filming. Although the company did not publicly provide detailed evidence or explain exactly when the alleged incidents occurred, it maintained that the findings were serious enough to end production altogether. According to Donovan, Dog's actions had created contractual and ethical problems that made it impossible for the show to continue. He also accused the reality star of launching personal attacks against company employees after the cancellation was announced, adding that Unleashed Entertainment would stand behind its staff and pursue legal action if the threats continued. While those allegations spread quickly, Dog wasn't about to stay silent. Rather than accepting the accusations, he took to social media and fired back. In a series of posts, he accused Unleashed Entertainment of wrongdoing instead. He alleged that the company had hacked and hijacked parts of his business and claimed it was attempting to profit from his name and brand without proper authorization. He also suggested that he held the rights to certain trademarks and promotional materials connected to the project. What had begun as a television cancellation had now evolved into a public battle, with each side accusing the other of misconduct. Supporters of Dog argued that people were rushing to judgment before hearing his side of the story. Others believed the production company would never have canceled an entire series unless it believed the allegations were credible. With neither side backing down, the controversy became bigger than the show itself. Then another development made this already bad situation worse. A lawsuit connected to the project alleged that marketing materials created for Dog Unleashed had been used to promote CBD products without proper authorization, seeking damages reportedly exceeding $100,000. While the lawsuit involved business dealings rather than the alleged comments that had dominated headlines, it added another layer of legal complexity to an already chaotic situation. With both sides telling completely different stories, who was really telling the truth? And how did the legal battle make an already explosive controversy even more complicated? The public feud that followed. Within days of the cancellation, Dog took to social media with a series of posts that painted a completely different picture from the one being presented by Unleashed Entertainment. Rather than admitting wrongdoing, he accused the production company itself of acting dishonestly. The accusations immediately sparked reactions. Instead of focusing solely on why Dog Unleashed had been canceled, people began asking whether this had become a business dispute that had spiraled into a public war. Supporters argued that there were now two completely different versions of the story, each accusing the other of misconduct. Without access to the evidence both sides claimed to have, it became increasingly difficult for the public to know who was telling the full truth. As the accusations spread, the story quickly escaped the courtroom and exploded across television, online forums, and social media. Some longtime supporters insisted Dog was being judged before all the facts were known, pointing to his decades-long career and history of overcoming controversy. Others argued that a production company would never abandon an expensive television series unless it believed the investigation had uncovered something serious. Almost overnight, the public found itself split into two very different camps. For Dog, that may have been the hardest part. Instead of discussing a new television show or another chapter in his career, nearly every conversation centered on the allegations, the canceled production, and the legal dispute. The comeback that was supposed to redefine his future had become overshadowed by questions he couldn't seem to escape. For someone whose career had been built on public trust and redemption, the timing could hardly have been worse. Years spent rebuilding his image suddenly collided with a controversy that threatened to overshadow everything he had accomplished before it. One thing, however, was impossible to ignore. The show that had been promoted as Dog's Return never reached viewers. Years later, many of the questions surrounding the dispute remain unanswered publicly. The full details behind the investigation were never released. The competing claims were never fully resolved in the eyes of the public. And supporters on both sides continue to interpret the events very differently. So after everything that unfolded, what really brought Dog's comeback to an end? Was it the allegations themselves, the legal battle that followed, or a combination of both? The truth is far more complicated. Long before the cancellation of Dog Unleashed, Dog devoted years building a successful career. He transformed himself from a former inmate into one of America's most famous bounty hunters, spent years capturing fugitives on national television, and inspired countless people with his belief that anyone deserved a second chance. At the same time, controversy had followed him throughout much of that journey. Over the years, he faced criticism over past recordings, legal battles, outspoken opinions, and deeply personal family struggles. Yet despite those setbacks, he repeatedly found a way to return to television and rebuild his career. That history is one reason the cancellation of Dog Unleashed attracted so much attention. What makes his story especially difficult to judge is that the central dispute was never fully resolved in the public eye. Unleashed Entertainment stood by its decision, maintaining that its internal investigation justified canceling the series. Dog, meanwhile, consistently denied wrongdoing and argued that the production company had its own motives for turning against him. Because the evidence behind the investigation was never publicly released in full, many questions remain unanswered. Perhaps that's why this controversy continues to fascinate audiences years later. Far beyond one canceled television show, it's a story about reputation, redemption, and how quickly decades of achievement can become overshadowed by a single controversy. It also raises uncomfortable questions about celebrity living itself. How should the public respond when serious allegations emerge before all the facts are known? And can a lifetime of accomplishments survive a moment that changes public perception almost overnight? Unlike many celebrity scandals that eventually reach a clear conclusion through court rulings or public admissions, this controversy remained surrounded by uncertainty. That lingering uncertainty is precisely what has kept people debating the story years after the headlines faded. Whatever answer people reach, one thing is undeniable. Dog's legacy can no longer be told through his television success alone. It now includes an unfinished chapter, filled with allegations, lawsuits, unanswered questions, and a comeback that never happened. Whether history ultimately remembers him as a man whose redemption inspired millions, or as a celebrity whose career was permanently altered by controversy, will likely remain a subject of debate for years to come. And perhaps that's why this story refuses to disappear. Because unlike most television cancellations, this one never gave audiences a clear ending, only a mystery that people are still trying to piece together. Do you think Dog Unleashed was canceled for the right reasons? Or do you believe there was more happening behind the scenes than the public was ever told? And if you were in Dog the Bounty Hunter's position, how would you have handled the controversy and the fallout that followed? Share your thoughts with us in the comments section. Remember to like, share, and subscribe for more. Also, click the next video showing on your screen. You will enjoy it.